Now we have Steve. Give him a hand.
Can I begin? Can I start? All righty. So let me begin by unpacking the acronym suggested by ChatGPT. So distributed is a reference to the proof system being fully distributed, which means you can massively parallelize with a cluster and with minimal communication complexity between the machines. And rough terrains is a reference to the finite fields in question, the ones where the circuits are going to live, lacking high duodicity or large smooth order subgroups more generally. So here are some of the motivating use cases. So the first one, the Edwards curve, will be familiar to anybody who's tried building a bridge from Solana or from Cosmos and run into the issue of the non-native arithmetic. The second is the curve used by Ethereum for its consensus. And although it's well suited for Snarks, it's not that well suited for one-layer recursion, which is why 377 was once proposed as a drop-in replacement. And lastly, if you want to aggregate multiple EVM-compatible Snark proofs together, you need to deal with BN254 scalar multiplications and pairings inside a circuit. So what these seemingly disparate use cases have in common is the base fields in question, they have low duodicity, and more generally, they don't have large smooth order subgroups. Now this largely, so there's actually some nuance to be had here, but it largely precludes the traditional Snarks and stars, which hinge upon univariate Lagrange basis and sparse vanishing polynomials. There's always the option of using a multilinear PCS, but that actually comes with trade-offs, and I'll touch upon that a little bit. On a broader note, you can construct a pairing-friendly outer curve to this, by which I mean a pairing-friendly curve that has a scalar field which coincides with the base field of the original curve. Alrighty, so here's what I was looking for. So I was looking for a backwards compatible proof system, which first of all could circumvent the enormous overhead of non-native arithmetic for these use cases. And secondly, something which could be massively parallelized with a cluster with low communication complexity between the machines. And lastly, for most of these use cases, you probably wanted to leave the door open for recursion in a non-native circuit, so you can compose the proofs with those of other NP statements. So you want the verifier to be as cheap as possible. This is roughly what the diagram looks like. So you have the master node in between, who's sending the fiat chamber challenges to the nodes at every turn, and he receives the commitments to certain polynomials and evaluations of these polynomials after each round. And he can add them up because it's a homomorphic commitment scheme, which I'll get into. So here are some of the forerunners to this. Planck needs no introduction. Pianist from the polyhedra team last year took Planck and made it fully distributed. The last one, actually, I didn't give it a name, but it's a monomial basis Snark I worked on back at Panther Protocol. It's not fully distributed, though. Alrighty, so here are some of the design choices. So the polynomial commitment scheme that we use is a bivariate KZG. And a downstream effect of that is it gives you constant proof size, verification time, and communication complexity. It requires a trusted setup, which is not ideal, but if you look around, most of the hash-based solutions at the moment are wrapping their proof inside a Gross-16 circuit at the moment. So I feel like we're already making that Faustian bargain in some way. Because there is no efficient Lagrange basis to work with, we use the coefficients, in other words, the bivariate monomial basis to commit to vectors, with each of the machines holding a part of this polynomial. So here's what a PCS opening looks like. This actually is independent of the bivariate distributed setting, but more generally. So you have this bivariate polynomial, and in order to verify that a certain opening is correct, the verifier requires the commitments to these two quotient polynomials. And the reason it works without any hiccups in the distributed setting is because the scheme is homomorphic. The KZG scheme is homomorphic. So the master node, all he's doing is he's adding up the elliptic curve points he receives from the various prover nodes. Alrighty, so just so there isn't a cloud hanging over the next few slides, I'm quickly going to go over how the superlinear part of the proof generation is going to work. So let's say you have two polynomials, f1 and f2, over an FFT unfriendly field, and you want to multiply them, right? So what we're going to do is we're just going to treat them as polynomials over the integers, or to be more precise, over the non-negative integers, and we're going to take the product over this monoid. It's not a ring or a group, but that doesn't really matter here. And the way we're going to do that is we're going to choose two nice primes, P1 and P2, and we're going to choose them large enough so that the product exceeds the coefficient, any of the coefficients of this resulting product. Now we're going to perform FFTs to obtain both this product modulo P1 and P2. And lastly, we're going to use the Chinese remainder theorem to recover the answer modulo P1, P2, which is the same as recovering the answer over the integers. And the last step is you reduce the thing modulo the original prime to get what you were looking for in the first place. Alrighty, so the arithmetization that we use is Plonkish, and that actually gives you custom gates, which comes in quite handy for the elliptic curve point additions and doublings. One of the common refrains about Plonkish arithmetization is that the addition gates are no longer free and they're not cheap. While we weren't really able to address that problem completely, what we do have is we have a mechanism that gets rid of the intermediate gates arising from large additions. I should say that it's not as nice as something like CQ-lin for smaller circuits, because CQ-lin actually makes them free. The flip side is what we have here. It doesn't require a quadratic setup, and it doesn't require high two-adicity. Alrighty, so the building blocks. So because everything is committed using the coefficients, perhaps the most important thing is you need an efficient protocol for the Hadamard product, by which I mean you have two polynomials, f1, f2, and you define a third by taking the product of the coefficient at each position. And the second thing you need, because it's Plonkish arithmetization, you need a permutation argument for the copy constraints. Okay, so let me quickly go over how the univariate Hadamard product is going to work before I jump to the bivariate distributed case. So let's say you have two polynomials, f1 and f2. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take this twisted product, by which I mean I'm going to twist the first guy by this challenge gamma, and I'm going to reverse the second guy. You might notice that if you expand this polynomial, the coefficient in the middle, the one at x to the t, coincides with the evaluation of this Hadamard product at the challenge gamma, right? So past this point, the only thing you need is you need a low degree test for the thing on the left. And the degree upper bound that seems to work the best for our use case is this guy. All you need to do is you need to prove that the thing on the right, the rational function, is in fact a polynomial. And this one lends itself quite well to the bivariate distributed setting without without any hiccups. And you can batch multiple Hadamard products by just taking a randomized sum. Okay, so let's go over how it works in a distributed setting, because that's what we're interested in. So let's say you have this Hadamard product that you want to prove. And the most important thing perhaps is you want to avoid any computations of products of polynomials held by different parties, because that would just blow up the communication costs. And that would kind of defeat the purpose of using a slow but homomorphic commitment scheme like KZG. So one thing you might notice is that this one single Hadamard product equation is equivalent to these individual Hadamard product equations being valid for each of these univariate Hadamard product equations being valid. So what we're going to do instead is we're going to verifiably send a commitment to this guy, the one whose coefficient at y to the j is this twisted product, the same trick as before. And it turns out that it suffices to show that the thing in the middle, the coefficient of x to the t, is this polynomial c of gamma y, where c is the claimed Hadamard product. And once again, you need to prove a degree upper bound on the thing on the left, to be more precise, an x degree upper bound. Okay, and in order to verifiably send a commitment to this guy, it turns out it just boils down to a Hadamard product equation, or FPY, which is proven by the master node. Alrighty, so the other thing is the permutation argument, by which I mean you have two committed polynomials, f and h, and you have a committed permutation, and you want to prove that the coefficients of these two polynomials are thus related. It turns out the log-up-esque argument turns out to be a little bit cleaner in this distributed setting compared to like the more traditional grand product argument. Okay, so I'm going to quickly go over how the Snark constraints are going to work. So let's define something analogous to Planck's selector polynomials so you can turn the different types of gates on and off. So the first thing you need to prove is you need to prove the appropriate degree upper bounds for these wire polynomials. The second thing you need to do is you need to prove that the addition and multiplication gates work the way they're supposed to, which, as I said before, is largely expressed through the Hadamard products. And the third thing, last but not the least, is you need a permutation argument for the copy constraints. Okay, so a brief overview of the Snark. So the proof size, because we use KZG, a downstream effect is that the proof size is constant, as is the verification time and the communication complexity between the machines. The worker node, his proof generation time is dominated by the MSMs, and to a much lesser degree, the sum of polynomial products he computes using the multi-modular FFTs. And the case of the master node is fairly analogous, except the parameters are much smaller in this case. So the MSMs are of length at most m, m being the number of machines, which in practice is quite small. So one thing I wanted to touch upon is maybe switching to a multilinear PCS. So let me say the obvious first. So you would have a linear time prover asymptotically, which is great. The downside, of course, is that the verification time gets worse, and so the non-native recursion would get worse. And of course, the proof size is larger, as is the communication complexity as a result. Here's the somewhat counterintuitive part, right, when it comes to the proof generation. So first of all, the benchmarks that we have so far, they suggest that these multi-modular FFTs are not really the main bottleneck, at least not compared to the MSMs. Even for a curve like BN254, right, at least when you're looking at circuits of reasonable size. The second thing is, for the use cases we're looking at, the base field is actually at least twice as large as the scalar field. So the base field is where the MSMs are going to live, whereas the FFTs are going to live in the scalar field. Which means the threshold beyond which the FFTs start to dominate is even higher. And the third thing is, what this work is doing, and that actually is kind of similar to what Pianist is doing with the Lagrange basis, is the length of the MSMs and the FFTs performed by any one single machine gets chopped up by the number of machines, right? Which means the threshold beyond which the n log n FFTs start to dominate gets pushed back even further. So some of the other things we have, in addition to the Snark, I mean, because it's Planckish, we have support for custom gates and lookups. One other thing that we have is we have a protocol for polynomial products in a Planckish circuit, which kind of comes in handy for BN254 pairings in a circuit if you want to aggregate multiple EVM-compatible proofs. Because you can actually multiply two FP12 elements in literally 12 Planckish gates. Here are some of the benchmarks. So take these with a grain of salt, because we haven't actually benched it with 32 machines. We actually implemented it for 32 machines, but we only used like a single machine so far. But with an outer curve to ED25519, it's like 26 seconds for a million-gate circuit. For the same size circuit, with a larger curve, which is like a 12-limb outer curve to BLS12381, it's like 56. And of course, if you use like 32 machines, which we haven't done yet, we expect it to get divided by 32 perhaps. It might not be literally linear, but should be close. And that's because the communication complexity between the machines is like negligible. Yeah. That's it.